Congratulations, Mary and Ken. What amazing accomplishments you've both had and are having, and both exemplars really of the Deming Cup and the principle of operations excellence and leadership. I have a very, very simple job today, and this is to introduce my good friend, Mary Boyce, who is the provost of Columbia University. And I'll say just very few words. Mary is an incredible scientist that comes to us from mechanical engineering, and more specifically the field of polymeric materials and soft composites. She has had a long career, and she has essentially won every possible award in her field. She's a fellow of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the National Academy of Engineering. She most recently won the Timosenko Medal, which is really the highest scholarly recognition in applied mechanics. And after about a quarter of a century at MIT, we were very, very fortunate to bring Mary here at Columbia in 2013 to become the Dean of the Fu Foundation School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And she served as Dean for 8 years, from 2013 to 2021. And where she's also the Morris and Alma Sapiro Professor. Now, I want to say what all of us recognize here at the university, that simply put, Mary has been a transformative leader at engineering. She helped improve educational programs, she expanded the faculty, increased research funding, deepen our commitment, or their commitment, engineering commitment, to path-breaking research across all departments at the school, promoting a vision that she coined of engineering for humanity. Another thing that Mary has done, which is also clear to all of us here at the university, is that she has been a transformative leader in changing the culture in the School of Engineering. And it's all through her values, her personality, her strategic vision, and her ability to sort of push an incredible faculty and student body forward throughout her tenure as Dean. Closer to home, closer to me, to myself, to my own life, Mary has been such a dear friend, a strategic partner, and now in her new role, she's one of my two bosses. So in our introduction that we just heard about the other Mary, Mary Barra, we heard how Barra is the only female CEO in the automotive industry, an industry that really underpins the DNA of our country. So it's important to also note that our own Mary, Mary Boyce, is the very first female provost of Columbia University. So Mary, thank you for joining us today. Please take it away.
All right, thank you, Kostis. I hope everyone can hear me. Yes, yes, can hear me fine. Fantastic. So Mary, Ken, where's Ken?
Is here. I'm still here.
I was waiting for you to join us on the Zoom image here. So first, let me congratulate you on this really incredible recognition, the Deming Cup for Operational Excellence. It really honors your remarkable leadership and also reflects your careers and your journeys to leading GM and Merck. These are two companies which each have a profound impact on the quality of our lives, and two global companies which must stay at the leading edge of science, engineering, technology, and business developments and disruptions to remain leading in their fields. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with us this evening. And I want to say a few words that our students, our faculty, our alumni have a deep interest and engagement with how their education, how their research, how their careers can have a real societal impact. As you heard Kostis say, I refer to this as how do we have our impact on humanity, on human lives around the world. And your companies, your trajectories are emblematic of such impact, and also how you each inspire and empower your employees to participate, to really truly contribute to the purpose and the mission and the vision of your companies. So I want to kind of focus around these aspects in our conversation. I want to talk about your personal journeys, your leadership style, how you lead through disruption, and also you've both spoken on the role of companies today in society, really shaping society, and also how that really informs how you attract and support and promote diverse talent in an ever-changing world. So I'm going to try in this short time to get some of your insights on each of these aspects. So let me go back to your personal journeys. Really, it's quite remarkable. You've each rose through the ranks of your company to where you are today. So I'm going to start with Mary, and because I saw you started really as an intern, right? and here you are today as CEO. Can you talk about that a little bit, and maybe some of the pivotal moments, people who impacted you along the way, any junctures that really, if you turned left instead of right, what would have happened?
Sure. Well, again, I just want to say also, I'm so honored to receive this award. So I want to thank the committee and Columbia and everyone associated. I'm truly honored and really accept this on behalf of all the men and women of General Motors that work so hard every day. But I would say the people that really impacted me early in my life were my parents. They didn't have an opportunity to attend college, but they believed in the American dream and they believed in hard work. And so they taught me, you work before you play, you always do the right thing, and you assume goodness in others. And I think I took that with me as I started my career at General Motors. And there were so many people that I learned from, so many people that pulled me aside and gave me constructive advice on how I can be a better engineer, a better leader, a better team member. And so I'm grateful to so many of those people throughout my career. But I think, one specific example I would give is when I had the opportunity to lead one of our manufacturing plants and realize that it was about winning the hearts and minds of every single employee, not just saying, here's what we need to do, but inspiring them to do that work and feeling part of the mission. And I felt that has always been something incredibly important, because at the end of the day, it's the people that are making everything happen.
Ken, can you talk a bit about how you got your start at Merck, and then how you ended up here as CEO of this incredible pharmaceutical company?
Well, let me start also by thanking the Deming Center people and all the judges and others at Columbia Business School who made this tremendous award possible for me. And I have to say, once again, I get to reflect on Mary Barra's luster, and to be associated with her is a great thing tonight. Like Mary, I have to say that I was very fortunate to be born in a household that had very strong values. My dad, and I mentioned my dad because my mother died when I was very young, and I had the opportunity to be raised by a single parent father who was very strict and not very sentimental, but very caring. And my dad was born in 1900, and his father was born in 1857. So that means there's only one generation between slavery and me. And yet, despite that, my father had strong beliefs in what this country fundamentally stood for. And he believed that if his children worked very hard and were committed to certain values, that we could do anything we wanted. And so in effect, I was brainwashed as a child growing up to believe that I could do anything. I also had the benefit, I have to talk about opportunity a little bit, because I was raised in the inner city of Philadelphia, and the social engineers decided that they would engage in what was then called school desegregation. So my younger sister and I were put on buses and sent to schools way outside our neighborhood. We were strangers in a strange land. But I must say, when I look back at that, that was the most important inflection point in my life, was that I was given a rigorous education, different from my older siblings who were raised in the same house. So I want to make that point. The second point I want to make is, when I came out of law school for 15 years, I wanted to be a lawyer. and I represented this company. The CEO of the company then was a really great CEO named Roy Vagelos, who's still alive. He's 92 years of age. And you know him because, of course, he was chairman of the board of Columbia. So everybody knows him.
Actually, I was in a meeting with him today.
There you go. He's an irrepressible life force. But at a time when it never occurred to me that I would do anything other than practice law, Roy brought me into the company. And shortly after bringing me into the company, he had me work directly for him, not in the law, he said to me. You need to learn the business of Merck. You need to understand that this company's salient purpose in the world is to alleviate human suffering. And for me, that close working relationship with Roy Vagelos in many ways, day after day, I have to say in the early 90s, before there were iPhones, you could have long exposures to someone without interruption. And as a result of that exposure to him, I think, frankly, on my best day at Merck, I'm simply imitating what I saw a great CEO who understood the fundamental purpose of this company. And that was what I think was the most important inflection point for me at Merck.
So Ken, I was going to ask the question of how did a lawyer end up as the CEO of Merck, and how did you take that journey? So this is really great to hear. And both of you commented on how you really were embedded in the heart of the company and what the real mission was. And you, even along your journey, you felt committed and a part of that. So can you talk about how does that really happen? How do you really get involved in that way? Mary. Oops, you're muted.
My dogs were very excited about hearing Ken talk, so I thought I would drown them out. So I apologize for that. You know, I think again, it just comes from assuming goodness in others and recognizing. My dad was a die maker at General Motors for 39 years and retired 6 months before I started, and so I feel like I grew up around General Motors and saw the importance of his work and many of his friends and the excitement of our products. And so as I joined the company, I joined it with that perspective. And again, assuming goodness and I always assume, you know, everybody wants to do the right thing and is working very hard. And I've seen that throughout different times in my career. And frankly, through the pandemic, you know, one of the things I observed, I've always felt if you empower people, great things are going to happen. But, you know, if you look back to when the pandemic started, and if I had to look at all the things we accomplished, if we had set out without the pressure of the pandemic, I think it would have been hard to plan and do. But we just made the mission clear and people just did amazing things. So my new mantra is empower people and get out of their way. And they'll, you know, accomplish things far more than you think they can individually. And it's the power of teamwork across the board. So I think that's just always been fundamental to me about how important people are because they are the company.
And from my standpoint, I think I would just say that, you know, I knew the company before I joined it. I was its lawyer on the outside, and Merck is a very purpose-led company. A mentor of mine who's on this call, Craig Thompson, will tell you all about the Hippocratic Oath and the importance of serving patients, serving humanity. And Merck had those values. In 1952, the founder of Merck was on the cover of Time magazine, which I tell my children is like being on everybody's Instagram at the same time today. And Merck was an obscure company, but when he made that comment about the importance of medicine for people and not for profits, that is what has driven the company. And so when I joined the company because it had a number of successes scientifically, but what was really attractive to me was embedded in this company was this concept that we had to provide as many people in the world with access to our medicines, because there's huge inequities in society, global inequities in our society. And the company has as its core values, scientific excellence and patient access. And so I always felt very strongly aligned to that. When I was a lawyer, I did a lot of pro bono work. I represented people under sentence of death and things of that nature. And you could spend 10 years to get one person off death row. Here, through the company's abilities, you could save and improve the lives of hundreds of thousands and millions of people.
It really comes to also then your leadership style, because you both are talking about the vision of the company, right? To really bring that impact, and also the culture of the company and how those kind of work together to empower employees with the sense of purpose. And if you can talk a little bit more about that, because I think, getting back to the sense that especially younger people today, and even older people, want to know that what they're doing can bring an impact on society. And there's a complex pathway for how each employee contributes. So how do you inspire the overall vision of the company and bring that to each employee and have them help have that sense of purpose and contribution? And it seems an inherent thing in each of you and your leadership styles, and but you go about it a bit differently.
Should I start?
Sure, I can.
So I have to say, it wasn't very difficult to do that inside Merck, because that larger purpose is part of the company's legacy. Every company that's successful has a mission, as GM now has, as Mary was articulating this vision to go into the future. Every company has to have something that causes people to feel inspired when they show up every day at work. I think Deming said that's, of course, a more important motivator than pay will ever be. And at Merck, I think that purpose, inventing medicines and vaccines that save and improve lives around the world, is something that employees come here. So from my standpoint as a leader, I had two roles. Number one was to reinforce that every time I had an opportunity to speak to employees. But more importantly, was to make sure that every action taken by the senior team was viewed by employees as consistent with that mission. And that means not only the things that we do in the core business, for example, inventing and bringing forward new medicines, but I'll give you a couple of examples. How do you actually use the company's resources to do things that you're not required to do? So 10 years ago or so, the company looked at the issue of preventable maternal mortality around the world and in the United States. That's not something that's part of our core business, but we said, look, it's not right that women should die unnecessarily giving life to children. And so let's do something that we're not required to do. Let's take $500 million of the company's money and invest it in doing something about preventable maternal mortality. It's the same when you develop an Ebola vaccine. You know you're not going to make any money. Or this year, unfortunately, our vaccines for COVID weren't successful, but we said, okay, how do we now support Johnson & Johnson by devoting 2 of our plants to manufacturing J&J's vaccines? I think people will listen to your rhetoric up to a point, but at the end of the day, they will judge you as a leader by whether or not your actions are consistent with the things that brought them to the company in the first place.
Ken, and again, so impressive of what you've done at Merck and what Merck stands for. And I've worked closely with you during this period. So it's just really humbling to be here with you as I think about everything you've done for the country and the world. For General Motors, I've been at General Motors now for 40 years. And if you look back to our beginning, the company grew because it really focused on the customer and solving issues. One of my favorite stories, if you go back to the early 1900s, if you remember, to start a vehicle, you actually had a crank start it. And it was quite hard. People broke their arms doing that. People of small stature, and especially women, often didn't have the ability to drive because crank starting a vehicle was so difficult. And General Motors invented the electric starter. And so when I look at the rich history we had at our founding of really focusing on the customer, because vehicles, as people could afford vehicles, it really changed lives. It changed the way people lived. It gave them freedom. And so, General Motors has an interesting and at points very difficult history. But as I look at where we are now, our mission is to create a world with zero crashes, zero congestion, zero crashes, zero emission, and zero congestion. And it's because I feel GM is uniquely responsible to now solve the issues that, this freedom of movement that, vehicles gave people, but with that came crashes, with that came an impact to the environment, and with that came congestion. And so I really feel now with the technology we have and the position General Motors has, we have the ability to solve that. And we weren't always a purpose-driven company for the over 100 years we've existed. In fact, we just worked on our purpose now, but we went back to that original pioneering spirit. And our purpose is to pioneer the innovations that move and connect people to what matters. And it was an interesting journey because, vehicles play an important role in people's lives, whether it's connecting us to loved ones or getting us somewhere we need to go for our job, for medical care, for whatever it is. And I'm finding that our employees are so inspired by not only, creating a world with zero crashes, zero emissions, zero congestion, but also creating EVs for everyone. Because we want to make sure as we make this transition from the internal combustion engine to the electric vehicle, that we don't cause a further divide and leave people behind or have communities that will be more impacted. And that's why we've set up a climate action fund. That's why we're investing in technologies, to Ken's point, that are beyond what we would be normally in our scope, because we believe we have to provide those solutions to fight climate change and to make sure this becomes a transition that drives more inclusion and equality as we move to electrification.
Let me come back to your point here, Mary, on electrification. And you now have a clear vision for the whole company to be behind on what the mission of the company is. But there was also quite a disruption to have the company really shift quickly to get on board that we really needed to move fast into electrifying our vehicles. And so how did you deal with that, right? You've got emerging companies and pressure coming from nowhere almost, to then taking General Motors to really position it to lead this revolution, and to have to do it very quickly, to have the company shift to that and have real impact in such a short time.
Well, it really goes back into about 6 years ago, where we looked and said, what is going to change the way people move? And it was how vehicles are propelled, autonomous connectivity, and then different modes of sharing. And so we started investing, whether it was acquiring Cruise, which is an autonomous vehicle that, when you think about the safety that it provides, 94% of accidents in the United States are caused by human error. Autonomous driving done safely doesn't drive distracted, follows traffic laws and rules, and we believe we will not implement it until it's proven to be safer than a human driver. But then with electrification, we had to start that work. And so the platform we're launching now, we actually started working on it well over 3 years ago. So we were doing a lot of work in the company. And then it was, I think, in the 17 or 18 timeframe, we started to talk about believing in an all electric future. And so that, again, took people on the journey. But I think what really crystallized it for everyone is when we said at the beginning of this year that we aspired to have all of our light duty vehicles by 2035 be electric, all electric. And that really was important for the company. And again, it was kind of a leadership insight for me, because it caused people to start debating when and how and if, to, my gosh, we've got to do it now. We've told the world we're going to do this, so we've got to figure it out. And I'm confident that we will. And so a lot of times, people believe in the mission, but there's a lot of debate and analysis of when and how. But once you put a stake in the ground, that's when everybody rallies to say we can do it. And that's what gives me great confidence.
It's very, very exciting to see, and how quickly everything's moving in that direction. Ken, you talked about how you shifted to help J&J once they had the vaccine, but to your credit, Merck also has an antiviral pill, right?
Yes.
And I was really impressed not only with how Merck came in with the help and the production for the J&J vaccine, but also as you're moving the antiviral pills through approval, simultaneously you are looking at access to this. Can you talk about that? Because that also comes to that company commitment that I think you called it medicine for the people and the patient access. So
yeah. So thank you for the question. You know, this antiviral oral medicine that we're developing and that we hope will get FDA approval, we think will be an important complement to the medicines and vaccines that we have. Vaccines have to be the first line, medicines and treatments come after them. But we know from experience that it's very hard to get these important medicines to all the people who need them in the world. And in this case, more than almost any other case in recent history, we're talking about a global pandemic. If we're not able to suppress this virus around the world, we'll have, you know, billions of people who will be breeding grounds for new mutations and new variants, which will then come around as the Delta variant has swept through our society. So it's in everyone's interest that we find ways of getting these helpful treatments and preventative measures to everybody. So as we were developing this, way before we saw data suggesting that this medicine worked, we asked ourselves, how can we make a contribution to the world? I talked about the George Merck quote. The end of that quote, which I didn't quote, says, "We shall not rest until the way's been found with our help to get the finest achievements of Merck to everyone in the world." So we had to ask ourselves, okay, if that's what we're about, how do we do that? And so we made a decision very early on that we were not going to let our intellectual property, our patents, prevent others from making this vaccine in the parts of the world where generally it's very hard to get medicine. So we did voluntary licenses with 8 Indian generic companies to give them the ability to manufacture this drug in 100 low and low middle income countries. And, you know, to me, I have to say, that's an example of what I said before. You can say to your people that you have certain values, but when you take an action like that, and there are people see that you took that action, then they're saying, look, you're not just articulating the values, but your actions are fully consistent with those values.
And I think, you know, you're both talking about the societal impact of your companies, right? And Ken, and yours in medicine and reaching, you know, populations around the world, and Mary, and really the focus on how do we shift transportation to actually be clean, to really focus on climate change and yet still enable our mobility and that we all love, right, so much. The sense of the importance of companies expressing their direct societal impact, I think that is also something that has shifted in the last 10 years to be more direct at expressing how you really engage and how your products engage with a positive influence on the world today. You might say, oh, we've always done that, but I don't think you had to be so publicly stating these impacts. Can you comment on that a bit and how that's really shifted in how the world views your company and even your ability to attract employees, the next generation for your company?
I guess I can start. You know, actually, though, I have to say, you know, what I just shared, that when we put out our goal or our aspiration to have all light-duty vehicles by 2035 be electric, we actually saw an uptick in applications and to want to work at GM. And I think, you know, this generation, more so than any other, millennials, Gen Z, whatever, they do care very much about not only working for a company, it's more than a paycheck. It's working at a company that they believe in the purpose and the mission of the company, because they do want to feel like they're doing and contributing to improving the world. And that is incredibly motivating. I mean, I have, you know, new employees joining, sending me emails about their ideas, their expectations, or their pride in what we're doing when we launch a new product or talk about a new initiative. And so I think in today's world, it is very important. We don't speak out on every issue, but we try to constantly reinforce our values and demonstrate to our employees that we're living our values and that they can take, pride in that we're going to take sometimes difficult stances or might be perceived by some as difficult because we're going to do the right thing. One of the things I learned very early in this role of being the CEO is you have to do the right thing even when it's hard. I think too often people think they have a decision or a choice, and you don't. You just got to do the right thing, and everything else will follow. And whatever, there'll be implications, there'll be financial implications. But if you do the right thing, I think you always come out of it better. And that's what I think motivates our employees every day. They know we're working to create a better future, and we're going to do the right thing as we're along that journey.
And I think our employees, no matter what field we're in, they want to believe that when they come to work, they're working for a company that is committed to the greater good of the world. And, in our instance, we have to deal with the issue of medicines that are not made available to everybody. So there's huge inequity. And so many people, as a result, live lives of suffering. And we have to ask ourselves how we can address that. I'll call the word that I learned in law school. That is an injustice. We have to ask ourselves whether or not the fact that we were born in a society that has resources should allow us to live longer, healthier, more pain-free lives than our fellow human beings. And let's remember, 6 billion people on the planet live in countries where the economics of that country don't allow them to afford the things that we take for granted in this country. So I think for us, it's really about living those values. If we're going to invent medicines, are we going to try very hard to make sure that we get them to the last mile? The last mile is in sub-Saharan Africa, it's in Asia, it's in South America, it's in the inner cities of the United States, it's in Appalachia in the United States. There are people who are suffering with mental illnesses, with diabetes and heart conditions, with pain issues, which have led to opioid issues. If we don't take a responsibility for getting these great new medicines for cancer and a lot of other things where we've been able to revolutionize oncology, if we don't care enough to get these to our fellow human beings, then I think our younger workforce will say, that's not a place where I want to spend the rest of my time. That's not a place that does more than give lip service to this concept of common good.
Yeah, I think, we see the same thing at universities today, that the young people are really attracted to how can they have an impact on these societal challenges, and when they're looking for the companies and where they go afterward, I think you hit it on the head with that they're watching your actions, and they want to be part of the mission and the vision that really brings change in the world on so many different dimensions. And you talked about how that really is empowering you in wonderful ways to attract this next generation to want to be part of your companies, your mission, your vision. And part of that is also, I know you both have an incredible commitment to making sure you attract that talent and the diverse talent that's out there. And how do you propel diversity in your workforce? And especially in a constantly changing world, right? The skill sets change. I know you each have many different programs, even within your companies, to make sure you're really supporting your employees during this time in many different ways. Can you talk about that? Because the world and business and the economy and the skill sets needed to shape your companies are changing too. So how do you manage all of that?
Well, I'll start. I think the world is changing quickly. The pillars of technology and innovation and culture, operational challenges, we're all dealing with all of those things at the same time. Fundamentally, our business is about addressing humanity's needs writ large. And if we're not sensitive to the lived experiences and the identities of all these people who we seek to serve, there's no way we're going to effectively do it. So to me, there's absolutely no question that if we don't seriously address the concept of making sure that we have a diverse and talented workforce, we're never going to reach the scientific and medical excellence that we need inside our company. It is not just something that's nice to say. You know, our business, again, is about serving humanity globally and having the insights in order to be able to do that. We've got to have those talented people. And so we have to put in place the kinds of programs that eliminate any kind of structural barriers or within our culture, any kind of subtle biases that prevent us from getting the best people. Because at the end of the day, our goal is to have excellence in everything we do. That's what Deming was all about, operational excellence. And I don't know how you get to operational excellence if you don't have the most excellent talent. And how do you get to the most excellent talent if you don't eliminate all barriers that prevent you from getting all the best talent?
I couldn't agree with Ken more. And just the way we look at it in the company, we've set the goal to be the most inclusive company in the world, but I'm always quick to say it's not a title we want to hold on our own. We want every company, institution to achieve that. And I've spent the last year and a half now listening. Because I thought, when I looked at General Motors' history, I think we have a rich history, many things I'm proud of that we've done from a diversity and inclusion perspective. And I sit here today as the CEO of General Motors because of some of that work and the opportunity and development that I had the opportunity to experience. But as I listened to different employees, different groups across the company, I learned we had so much more work to do. And it's really of creating this culture of not just diversity, but also equity and inclusion. And, the very simple way in my journey of listening, what sticks with me now every day, one of our leaders said, really, it's all about how you make someone feel. And I can tell you there's times in our company where I didn't feel very good. I didn't feel included. I didn't feel like my voice mattered. And so if we all work every day with the people we are working with, no matter what group we're working in, to care about how we make other people feel, is their opinion valued? Are they respected? Do we show them that their work matters and that, they have career opportunities? Making people feel, inspired and wanting to be part of the team, I think goes a long way for creating that culture, that work environment we want to have, where we're going to achieve the inclusion, the equity that we're looking for. And then I also have to say, because Ken won't say it, I was so inspired by 110 that Ken created, and General Motors joined it. And as we continue to work and see opportunities of how we can be so much better, I'm inspired, but I'm also I should say overwhelmed, but recognize how much work we still have left to do.
Thank you, Mary.
I think that's really well said. And it's how we have the right culture to really, you have to embed that throughout every employee, every part of the company, and then also how do you take that outside of the company? You know what, I'm seeing that that I've got a bunch more questions, but I think I now will need to switch to questions from the audience because I see a number of hands up. So Kalpana, will you take hold of the questions or?
Absolutely, but I also wanted to say, by all means, please go ahead for a little bit more time. This has been an incredibly engaging conversation, yes. So please, if you want to continue.
I had a couple more things I did want to ask, and
by all means,
when you think of you put these different pieces together. You've got your workforce, you have your societal impact, you have the sense that the companies now have to be so much more today than I would say 20 years ago, right? And how do you navigate that? Because you had to go through this journey as the expectations of a leader also changed, and also as more and more disruption was happening. So I know that that's a wide open question, but there's some key aspects to leadership today, and what prepared you for this really changing role of a leader today.
Well, should I take a?
Yes,
Sure.
Ken.
Sure.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm looking at Ken first, but you can't tell on a Zoom.
So I think we've talked about the importance of keeping in place the fundamentals around the company's purpose and its mission and its culture and all of those things. At the same time, obviously, the world around us is changing at light speed.
Right.
And I think this pandemic has shown that. Look at how we're now having this meeting, right? No one ever imagined that we would be having a meeting on something called Zoom. 2 years ago, I didn't know what Zoom was. And so all of this technology has completely changed how I live our lives every day. It's also changed our ways of working. In our industry, obviously, you saw companies come forward in 10 months with a vaccine. Before that, the fastest anybody had ever developed a vaccine was 4 years. And so those kinds of changes in technology, in the ways of working and things of that nature have to be allowed to happen in your company at the same time that you keep your mission and your culture, rooted in the things that made you great. And so for me, a big part of that is inverting the power structure. I've always felt that the challenge is you can't have the people at the top, the CEO, for example, driving all the important decisions inside the company. I've always said the most important decisions inside Merck are not made in my office, and they shouldn't be made in my office. They need to be made close to the customer, on the manufacturing floor, and also at the laboratory bench, because that's the cutting edge. I was able to speak to 2 young people who are responsible for Keytruda, our largest product, and one that's revolutionized cancer. And one of the things that struck me was I asked these 2 young scientists what their experience was. And one of the things they said is they had to resist the senior people above them who thought they were working on something that wasn't going to come to a positive end. And I think to myself, how lucky we all are that these 2 very young scientists had conviction about the work that they were doing and didn't actually allow people above them in the pyramid to tell them to focus elsewhere. So I think it's really important for those of us who are running these companies to empower the people who are closest to the customers, closest to the science, closest to the manufacturing floor, to do the things that are necessary for us to continue to be successful in a world that is changing tremendously, particularly with technology.
Yes. Yeah.
Ken said that well. I have very little to add because I completely agree with him, and I've seen it just allow amazing things to happen. The only thing I'll add in a little bit different dimension is there was so much written over the last couple of years when the Business Roundtable talked about stakeholder capitalism. And as I look at it and we look at, you describe the bigger role or the more expectations that on a company, on a CEO, I think the best run companies over decades are the ones who always looked at not only, what's best for the shareholders, but if you do the right thing for your people, for your customers, for your suppliers, for us, it's our dealers, our unions, and then the communities where you live and work, you are going to do the best thing for your shareholders over the long term. And I think it's always been a little amazing to me right now how people are still debating that, because when they first asked me about it, I'm like, well, yes, that's what we have to do the right thing for our shareholders. So I think, it's the empowerment Ken talked about, and then it's looking at all your important stakeholders who without you won't succeed.
So it's this whole ESG is sort of already embedded in your company ethos in any event. I want to come back to something else that Ken said was in the, when you're, we often call it being ready, right? That you had some basic science going on with from your scientists, taking some risks in what they're doing, but it leads to the new development. And so how do you make sure you are able to commit to that risk? And how do you also, on the other hand, if you've missed something, right? We also see that sometimes the innovation comes from a small company, a smaller company outside, and perhaps you bring them into your company, you acquire them. So how do you think on like making those decisions of when are we ready to and prepared for developing in-house, and when do we need an injection of innovation from outside because it's happening there?
Well, the nature of our business is that because of the patent life of any drug, this is a business that if you don't reinvent yourself over and over again, you're out of business. And so I think that's something that's part of our culture. But you just touched on something else, which is that our world has changed in a lot of ways. One of which is that very bright young people, and I know you know this at Columbia, they can access venture capital or capital and start small companies unencumbered by what people call the corporate tax and move forward on things that they want to move forward with. And it's really important for companies like Merck to not only have their own in-house science. We consider ourselves a company that's not just a drug development company. We still engage in scientific discovery.
Right.
But we also need to understand that they are many and we are few. And they are very bright young people. And so we need to create the kinds of relationships with these smaller companies that are doing cutting edge science so that we get the benefit of those kinds of relationships. And I would also say that it's not just acquiring them, because I think sometimes acquiring them squashes what they're all about. It's creating the right kinds of partnerships so that they can continue to pursue their mission, pursue the science that got them to create that company in the first place. So I think this is all very important. And I would say in terms of COVID, I'll come back to companies like Moderna and BioNTech, which were invested in mRNA vaccine technology for years and made huge investments in it before it had any proven prospect of success. And I think we have to remember that a lot of the important things are going to come from those people who are in some ways trying to upset the status quo.
Exactly. And I'll throw universities in there as good partners on these things too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, we should have mentioned on our molnupiravir drug, I meant to mention it. That work was started at Emory University, and the credit needs to go to the folks at Emory University.
Mary.
Again, I think it's very similar. Good ideas can come from anywhere. And especially, when you look at where new ideas are coming from, not only do we think great ideas come from within our company, we actually run our own version of Shark Tank, where we really encourage people to come up with different proposals and different ideas and work in small teams and bring them forward. We also work with a number of universities and then have our own venture fund where we're forming relationships with companies and either investing in them and depending on how strong the relationship is, to allow them to succeed and allow General Motors to succeed. So I think if you start with the idea that great ideas can come from anywhere and you've got to be open to it, and you can be disrupted if you don't keep that open mindset. It's very true, and whether it's in medicine or in any business, I think these days.
No, thank you for that. I think it's a really shifting dynamic and how fast the innovation can be happening. But also, as Ken was also mentioned, that there may have been many years that went into that sudden fast innovation, and how do you put all those pieces together? I'm going to go to the questions now from the audience.
Absolutely.
Oh, Kalpana, you're going to join us and moderate this part. I'm going to stay on, but thank you, Ken. Thank you, Mary. What an inspiration you each are, and it's really great to have this conversation.
Thank you, Mary.
Yeah, thank you, Mary.
Boris, thank you so much for so expertly steering this insightful discussion. We've truly enjoyed hearing all three of you speak about, issues that are close to your heart: impact, purpose, empowerment, all of this that is important in the practice of your leadership. And now it's my pleasure to open up the floor to questions from the audience. To everyone who has a question, your hands are up, so we'll be calling on you. Make sure your video is on and please state your full name and affiliation before you ask your question. I'd like to start by calling upon Zina Sokral. Zina, please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Kalpana. Congratulations again to Mary and Ken. My name is Zina Sockwell. I'm a program manager at the Chase Institute here at Columbia Business School. My question's for both of you. So I know that a core part of the Deming philosophy is that we can all learn from each other, even when we think we're pretty different. And I was wondering if there are any industries or companies that you really admire, whether it be their product or their brand or how they've reinvented themselves, and that you've tried to emulate as a leader in your company.
Well, maybe
I
I'll
guess-
start. Oh, go ahead, Mary, please start.
Oh, no, sure. Ken, please.
Okay, so there are a lot of companies, particularly some of the startup companies in the biotech field, but I also look at some of the technology companies. I think that the traditional areas that we focus on, biology, chemistry, those are still very important areas, and we don't have generalizable rules, for example, in human biology. But I think we learned a lot by looking at some of the companies in the technology field and learning from them, learning the ability, how you bring sort of high-level analytics to the solving of problems in human biology. And so looking at some of those companies that are out there in, I'll just say, generally speaking, in Silicon Valley, has been really helpful to us. And it's also been helpful in the sense that we see companies having a different risk appetite and a different approach to, looking at things that have not traditionally been used before, but being very open to iteration and innovation in that way, which is something that I think for us, we've been a little bit less willing to do simply because when you make a drug and you put it into someone's body, you probably have to make sure that you've limited the risk for that. But that doesn't mean all parts of our business have to also be risk averse.
Very similar, one of the concepts that we've tried to make sure that we implement in areas that we can is this idea of minimum viable product. So often when you look at a vehicle, if you're talking about the safety systems on a vehicle, they have to be, fully developed, validated, and you lock them down before you release a new vehicle. But then there's the opportunity in other parts of the vehicle, say the infotainment system or the connected services, where you can really start with a minimum viable product. And so that idea of rapid, getting the minimum viable product and then rapidly innovating on it and making it better and adding new features weekly or monthly, I think is something that we are adopting in the company. And then the other quick example I'd give is Disney. We knew as part of our journey that General Motors needed, over the last decade, needed to become more focused on the customer. And what better company from a customer service perspective than Disney? And so we've done a lot of work and training to help people, really, when we say put the customer in the center of everything we do, what does that really mean? And Disney's really been helpful in that regard.
Great, thank you. Our next question will be from Klaus Kleinfeld. Klaus, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. So Mary and Ken, congratulations. You really deserve it. And it's always a pleasure to be with you, So you both have the pleasure to work in industries who are going to really substantial changes. So Mary, I have one very specific question to you. Although you know that I love driving very much and very fast, but at the same time, I'm also excited about sometimes in New York traffic going autonomously. So when do you think that we will be driving more than 50% of our time autonomously? And Ken, you had the pleasure of running a company, and I always felt as a CEO, you get the pleasure for a certain time, and when the time is up, then there are reminiscences, but I don't want to talk about the past. I want to talk about the future. If you look at this industry, in the future, what are you most excited about, what this industry is going to face?
So just really quickly, when we look at how fast Cruise autonomous driving capability is developing, we will still be gated by safety. But we just recently shared that we think, within months, we'll be able to do that in the first city that we've worked in with San Francisco. And then, how fast we can expand, I think, will somewhat be regulatory driven, and we're working on that. But I would say in a handful of years, less than one handful, we'll see dramatic change if the regulatory environment in this country allows it. In many other countries, it's already in place. So it becomes, do we want to lead or do we want to follow from a US perspective?
And I think in our industry, there's two things that I would cite. First of all, the last century was one of, great insights around physics and material science. When I was a kid, our great ambition in the United States was to send people into space. Now private entities send people into space because the laws of physics, the generalizable rules about space travel are understood by more than a few people. I think the same thing is going to happen with human biology in the next century. So I think this is the century of biology, of unlocking some of the mysteries, particularly of the human body and on the genetic level, at the cellular level. So I'm very excited about that. The other thing I'm very excited about, and I've started working with Ken Chenault and others in this area, is what benefits come from computational science when you marry that with something like biology. How can we bring those things together to speed up innovation? And I don't mean simply just in our laboratory. I mean in finding ways to reduce costs in the healthcare system, to actually get the best of medicines to people. Particularly, I want to come back to the inequity issue. The ability for us to get these medical interventions to people who are deprived because they don't have access to our physical healthcare infrastructure is something that I'm also very excited about. I'll just say that I heard the other day that the rate of depression in this country has tripled during the pandemic. Well, we certainly haven't tripled the number of psychiatrists. And the question becomes, how do we use technology to actually get that care to people who need it? And I'm very excited again about what technology can do, both from an innovation standpoint and an equity standpoint.
Thank you. I had a problem unmuting. Thank you for that. Our next audience member is Jacqueline Young. Jackie, please go ahead.
Hi. Oh, you two are so inspirational. I'm just enjoying every bit of this. My name is Jacqueline Young, and I'm from Good for Girls, Inc. Incorporated, which is a mentoring organization for young girls. So my question is three parts. How do you as a man of color and you as a woman draw the courage to speak out against the inequities that you find in education, in politics, and in the corporate world? And what is it about your life experiences that allowed you to do so? And then what advice do you have for others?
I'll start. And Ken, you said this earlier, but I was raised the same way. My mother and father raised me as a young child to believe if I worked hard, I could do anything. And so I took that with me, and I didn't realize until the middle of my career what a gift that was, because I didn't necessarily think, well, can I do it? I always had this, yeah, of course, if I work hard, I can do it, which allowed me to feel comfortable in rooms where now I look back and maybe I should have been so comfortable. But I mean, it really gave me that courage and that confidence. And as a young engineer, though, at General Motors, I did have to find my voice, and there were mentors around me who encouraged me to speak up in meetings, to have a point of view. One of them is on the call tonight, Sherry Alexander, and that really helped me, I think, gain credibility in the organization, which then opened up opportunity.
And from my perspective, I said a little bit about this when I was talking about my upbringing. I was raised in the inner city of Philadelphia. I was given opportunities that the kids around me were not given, that my older siblings were not given. So I realized the extent to which opportunity is granted in our society. In terms of education, my parents could not afford real estate that was proximate to where the good schools were in our region. But someone allowed me to go from the poorest part of Philadelphia to the best parts of Philadelphia from an educational standpoint. So I've always felt an obligation to say what I know from my own life experience, which is that opportunity is not equally distributed in our society, despite all of our intentions. But talent is much more evenly distributed in our society. I know I wouldn't be on this call had I not been given those opportunities. So frankly, to be honest, when I've spoken up, I've always spoken up because I feel that I've been given a platform, and that one of the responsibilities that I have as the CEO of Merck, in addition to bringing Merck forward as a company, is to share my life experience and to speak up on behalf of those people in our society who are voiceless. Because but for a few interventions, I would simply not be where I am today.